The roar of laughter died the moment the stranger's slurred words cut through the warmth of the Crooked Barrel Tavern, and Ethan Dalmore felt his blood turn to ice before it ignited into something far more dangerous. He had been sitting quietly at a corner table with Grishka, his calloused farmer's hands wrapped around a mug of ale he had barely touched, watching her animated face as she told him about the clever way she had rigged a pulley system to help with the well repairs on his property. Her green skin gleamed in the firelight, her small tusks visible as she smiled, and Ethan had been thinking, not for the first time, that he would do anything to keep that smile on her face. They had been coming to the tavern together for 3 months now, ever since she had started working on his farm, and every week the stares bothered him a little less, and his feelings for her grew a little stronger. But the drunk's words changed everything in an instant. "Look at that, boys," the stranger bellowed from across the room, his voice thick with ale and malice. "A human rutting with an orc so. Bet she squeals real good when he sticks her, probably sounds just like the pigs in his pen." The entire tavern went silent. Ethan saw Grishka's expression shift from surprise to hurt to carefully controlled blankness, the mask she wore when humans reminded her of what they thought she was. Her hand tightened around her mug, knuckles going pale green, but she did not move. She had learned, she had told him once, that reacting only made things worse. Ethan did not have that restraint. He was across the room before he made a conscious decision to move, his chair clattering backward. The drunk was a big man, red-faced and broad-shouldered, surrounded by 3 companions who were already half standing in anticipation of trouble. Ethan did not care. All he could see was the way Grishka had flinched, the way years of insults and hatred had carved themselves into that moment of wounded dignity. "Say that again," Ethan said, his voice low and deadly calm. The drunk grinned, showing yellowed teeth. "I said your orc whore probably squeals like—" Ethan's fist caught him in the mouth before he could finish. A solid right hook that snapped the man's head back and sent blood spraying across the floorboards. The drunk's companions surged forward, and then chaos erupted. Someone grabbed Ethan from behind, arms locking around his chest, but he drove his elbow back hard into soft stomach and felt the grip loosen. Another man swung at his head. Ethan ducked and came up with an uppercut that connected with a satisfying crunch. The tavern exploded into motion around them, patrons either scrambling for the exits or joining the fray with the enthusiasm of people who had been looking for an excuse to fight. Through the blur of fists and bodies, Ethan caught sight of Grishka. She had risen from their table, her face set in hard lines, and as he watched, she caught a man who was reaching for a bottle to use as a weapon and twisted his arm with practiced efficiency until he dropped it with a yelp. Her eyes found Ethan's across the chaos, and in them, he saw something fierce and protective that made his heart hammer even as someone's fist caught him in the ribs. The original drunk had recovered and came at Ethan with a roar, tackling him into a table that splintered under their combined weight. They rolled across the floor, trading punches, and Ethan tasted blood in his mouth, but did not stop. He was vaguely aware of the tavern keeper shouting, of more crashes and the sound of breaking furniture, but all that mattered was making this man pay for every word he had said about Grishka. Strong hands suddenly hauled the drunk off him, and Ethan looked up to see Grishka holding the man by the back of his shirt with one hand, her considerable strength making it look effortless. She met Ethan's eyes for a brief moment, something complicated and vulnerable flickering across her face, before she hurled the drunk toward the door with enough force that he stumbled and crashed into his friends. "Get out," she said, her voice carrying across the sudden lull in the fighting. "All of you. Now." There was something in her tone, in the set of her shoulders and the controlled power in her stance, that made even the drunkest patrons pause. The strangers scrambled for the door, the original instigator clutching his bleeding mouth. And within moments, the tavern was emptying of everyone except the regular patrons and the furious tavern keeper. Ethan pulled himself to his feet, his ribs aching and his knuckles split and bleeding. The tavern keeper, a grizzled man named Marcus, surveyed the damage with a look of weary resignation. "That is coming out of your coin, Dalmore," Marcus said, gesturing at the broken furniture and shattered mugs. "And you are both banned for a month. I do not need this kind of trouble." "Marcus, I am sorry, but Ethan started, but the tavern keeper held up a hand. "I know what he said. I heard it, and I do not blame you for throwing the punch." Marcus's eyes softened slightly as he looked at Grishka, who stood rigid and silent. "But I cannot have brawls tearing apart my establishment every week. Folk are already nervous about having an orc in here. This just makes it worse." The words hung in the air, well-meaning but cutting nonetheless. Grishka's expression did not change, but Ethan saw the way her shoulders drew in, making herself smaller. "It is fine," Grishka said quietly. "We will go." She turned and walked out into the night without waiting for Ethan, moving with careful dignity. He exchanged a look with Marcus, saw the apology in the older man's eyes, and followed her out. The cool evening air hit him like a slap after the heat and chaos of the tavern. Grishka was already several paces down the dirt road that led out of the small village of Millbrook, heading toward the path that would take them back to his farm. Ethan jogged to catch up, his bruised ribs protesting. "Grishka, wait," he called. She stopped but did not turn around. When he reached her side, he could see her jaw was clenched, her hands fisted at her sides. "You should not have done that," she said, still staring straight ahead down the dark road. "Done what? Defended you, started a fight, gotten yourself hurt. Gotten us banned from the only tavern within 10 miles. Her voice was tight, controlled. "I have heard worse than what he said, Ethan. I have heard much worse. I can handle insults." "Well, I cannot," Ethan said fiercely. "Not when they are about you." She finally turned to look at him, and in the moonlight he could see the conflict written across her features. "Why? Why does it matter so much to you what some drunk says about an orc worker on your farm?" The question hung between them, weighted with everything they had both been carefully not saying for months. Ethan felt his heart pounding, his split knuckles throbbing, and the words rose up before he could stop them. "Because you are not just a worker on my farm, Grishka. You know that. You have to know that by now." She stared at him for a long moment, her dark eyes searching his face. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Do not say things you do not mean, Ethan. Not about this." "I mean it," he said, stepping closer. "I have meant it for weeks now. Maybe longer. I just did not know how to tell you." Grishka shook her head slowly, and he saw the gleam of moisture in her eyes. "You do not understand what you are saying, what it would mean. I am an orc, Ethan. My people are monsters to yours. There is no future in," she stopped, as if afraid to name what was forming between them. "Then we make our own future," Ethan said. "On my farm, in my home. I do not care what anyone else thinks." "You should care," she said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "Today was just a drunk in a tavern. What about when it is your neighbors, your family? What about when they burn your fields or worse because you are harboring an orc?" Ethan reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and took one of her hands in both of his. Her skin was warm, her palm calloused from hard work just like his own. "Let me worry about that," he said. "Right now, I just need to know one thing. Do you feel this too, this thing between us?" For a moment he thought she might pull away, might retreat behind those walls she had built to survive in a world that hated her. But then her fingers curled around his, gripping tightly, and she nodded once. "Yes," she whispered. "I feel it. I have been trying not to, but I do." Relief and something warmer flooded through Ethan. He lifted her hand and pressed his lips to her knuckles, a gentle kiss that made her breath catch. "Then that is all that matters," he said. They walked home hand in hand through the darkness, neither of them speaking, both of them aware that everything had changed, and there was no going back now. The farm greeted them with the familiar sounds of animals settling for the night and the creak of the old wooden gate. Ethan's property was modest but well kept. A sturdy stone farmhouse that had belonged to his parents, a barn housing 2 cows and several chickens, and 20 acres of fields where he grew wheat and vegetables. It was honest work, hard work, and it had always been enough for him. But since Grishka had arrived 6 months ago, answering his posted notice for seasonal help, the farm had started to feel like something more. Like a home. She had appeared one morning with nothing but a worn pack and desperation in her eyes. An orc woman alone in human territory with nowhere else to go. Ethan had needed the help. Managing a farm alone was brutal work, but more than that, something about her careful dignity and the way she held herself despite obvious exhaustion had moved him. He had hired her on the spot, offered her the small cottage on the edge of his property, and tried not to notice how his days became brighter when she was near. Now, standing in the yard with her hand still in his, that careful distance they had maintained felt like a flimsy thing, ready to shatter. "Your hand," Grishka said suddenly, her eyes dropping to his split knuckles. "Let me clean it." She led him into the farmhouse kitchen, a cozy room with a large fireplace and a sturdy wooden table where they had shared countless meals. Grishka moved around the space with easy familiarity, gathering a bowl of water and clean cloth, and Ethan sat where she indicated, watching her. She worked in silence, her touch gentle as she cleaned the blood from his knuckles and examined the damage. Her brow furrowed in concentration, small tusks just visible, and Ethan found himself mesmerized by her. How had he ever thought of her as just a farm hand? How had he spent months telling himself his feelings were nothing more than gratitude or loneliness? "You are staring," Grishka said without looking up, but he heard the faint amusement in her voice. "I know," he admitted. She did look up then, her hands stilling on his. "Ethan, what are we doing?" Truly, it was a fair question, and he owed her an honest answer. He turned his hand over so he could lace his fingers through hers. "I do not know exactly," he said, "but I know that I look forward to seeing you every morning. I know that your laugh is my favorite sound. I know that when I think about the future, you are in it." He paused, gathering courage. "I know that I am falling in love with you, Grishka, and I do not want to fight it anymore." Her breath caught, and he saw a dozen emotions flicker across her face: hope, fear, longing, doubt. When she spoke, her voice was thick with feeling. "I was cast out of my clan for being too soft toward humans," she said. "When I was younger, I helped a human child who was lost in the mountains near our territory. I gave her water and led her back to the human settlements. My clan said I was a traitor to my people, that I had forsaken my blood. They drove me away and told me never to return." She squeezed his hand. "I have been alone for 3 years, Ethan, moving from place to place, taking work where I could find it, always leaving before anyone decided an orc was too much trouble to keep around. And then I came here." "And you stayed," Ethan finished. "I stayed because you were kind, because you treated me like a person instead of a monster or a beast of burden. Because working your land and eating meals with you and listening to your terrible jokes made me feel like maybe I could have a life, even if I had lost my clan." She reached up with her free hand and cupped his cheek, her touch achingly tender. And then I started to fall in love with you, and I was terrified because I knew it could not last. Nothing good ever lasts for an orc in human lands." "It will last," Ethan said fiercely. "I will make sure it lasts." "You cannot promise that. You do not know what people will do." "Then we will face it together." She searched his eyes for a long moment, and then, slowly, she leaned in. Ethan met her halfway, their lips coming together in a kiss that was gentle and tentative and full of all the things they had been holding back. She tasted like the honey mead she had been drinking, and when she made a small sound in the back of her throat, Ethan felt heat rush through him. They broke apart, both breathing hard, and Grishka rested her forehead against his. "Stay in the house tonight," Ethan said quietly. "Not in the cottage. Stay with me." "Ethan, just to sleep," he clarified, though the way his body was responding to her nearness made that feel like both a promise and a challenge. "I just want you close." She nodded, and he saw the relief in her expression, as if she had been hoping he would ask. They finished tending to his injuries in charged silence, and then Grishka banked the fire while Ethan locked the doors. It felt domestic and right, moving through the evening routine together. His bedroom was simple. A large bed with quilts his mother had made, a chest for his clothes, a window overlooking the fields. Grishka stood uncertainly in the doorway until Ethan took her hand and drew her inside. They undressed down to their underthings with a careful modesty that felt absurd given what they had just confessed to each other, and then they climbed into bed. Ethan lay on his back, and after a moment's hesitation, Grishka curled against his side, her head resting on his chest. He wrapped his arm around her, feeling the warmth of her body, the solid reality of her in his arms. "This is dangerous," she murmured into the darkness. "I know. People will hate us. I know. You could lose everything." "Not everything," Ethan said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Not if I have you." She was quiet for a long moment, and then she said, so softly he almost missed it, "I love you too, Ethan. I have for a while now." He held her tighter, feeling like his heart might burst from his chest. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the wheat fields, and inside, Ethan Dalmore fell asleep with an orc woman in his arms and felt more at peace than he had in years. The trouble started, as Ethan should have known it would, less than a week later. They had fallen into a new rhythm on the farm, one that felt both natural and thrilling. Grishka still worked the fields and tended the animals, but now they worked side by side, and their conversations had shed the last vestiges of careful employer-worker distance. She kissed him goodbye when she went to feed the chickens. He pulled her into his arms when they took breaks from the harvest work. At night, she slept in his bed, and though they had not yet taken things beyond kissing and careful caresses, the intimacy of sharing a bed, of waking tangled together, felt profound. Ethan had never been happier, which perhaps made him careless. He should have expected that word would spread about the tavern brawl. Millbrook was a small village where everyone knew everyone's business, and a fight over an orc woman was exactly the kind of gossip that traveled fast. He should have known that his neighbors, already wary of Grishka's presence, would react poorly to confirmation that she was more than just hired help. But he had been wrapped up in the glow of new love, and so he was taken by surprise when 3 men appeared on his property one afternoon, while he and Grishka were working to repair a section of fence. Ethan recognized them immediately. Bernard Fletcher, who owned the neighboring farm to the east, Thomas Grimley, the village blacksmith, and James Crane, one of the more prosperous farmers in the area. They rode up on horseback, their faces set in hard lines, and Ethan felt his stomach sink. "Can I help you?" he called out, straightening from where he had been hammering a post into the ground. Bernard dismounted, his expression cold. He was a thick-set man in his 50s with a gray beard and the kind of self-righteous bearing that Ethan had always found insufferable. "We have come to talk some sense into you, Dalmor," Bernard said, "about your orc problem." Beside him, Ethan felt Grishka tense, but she did not move or speak. He stepped slightly in front of her, a protective gesture he did not bother to hide. "Grishka is not a problem," Ethan said evenly. "She is my employee and my guest. This is my property, Bernard, and unless you have a good reason for being here, I will ask you to leave." "Your guest," Thomas repeated, his lip curling. "Is that what we are calling it now? The whole village has heard about what happened at the Crooked Barrel. About how you started a brawl over your orc whore." "Watch your mouth," Ethan snapped, his hands clenching into fists. "Or what? You will start another fight," James spoke up, staying on his horse. "Wake up, Dalmor. You are making a fool of yourself and bringing shame on this community. Orcs are the enemy. They raid our settlements, kill our people, and you are betting one like she is some kind of proper woman." "She is more proper than any of you," Ethan shot back, his temper rising. "Grishka has worked this farm for 6 months without complaint. She has helped me bring in the best harvest I have had in years. She has been a better neighbor than most of the humans around here, and I will not stand here and let you insult her." "Then you are as much a traitor as she is a monster," Bernard said flatly. "We have come to give you a choice, Dalmor. Send the orc away today, and we will let this incident pass. Keep her, and you will find yourself without friends or aid when you need it. Your crops will rot in the fields because no one will help you harvest them. Your animals will sicken because the farrier will not come. Your tools will break because Thomas will not repair them. You will be alone, boy, and this farm will fail." The threat was clear and devastating. Ethan had always known farming was not work one man could do alone, not if he wanted to succeed. The community relied on each other for help during harvest, for trade, for expertise. To be cut off would mean struggle and likely ruin. He felt Grishka's hand touch his back, a gentle warning pressure. When he glanced at her, he saw resignation in her eyes, and he knew what she was thinking. That she would leave to save him, that her presence was not worth his livelihood. The hell with that. "Then I will manage alone," Ethan said, looking Bernard in the eye. "Because I would rather fail with Grishka at my side than succeed by abandoning her to please small-minded bigots like you." Bernard's face flushed with anger. "You are making a mistake. No, you are. You are standing on my property, threatening me and insulting the woman I love. Get out. Now. Before I make you." For a tense moment, the 3 men stared at him, and Ethan prepared for another fight, but Thomas shook his head and remounted his horse. "Let him learn the hard way," Thomas said. "Come winter, when he is starving, he will remember this conversation." They rode off, leaving Ethan and Grishka standing in the torn-up dirt of the fence line. As soon as they were out of sight, Ethan felt his legs go weak, and he sat down hard on the ground, his head in his hands. Grishka knelt beside him, her face stricken. "Ethan, you cannot do this. You cannot throw everything away for me. I will leave. I will go tonight and maybe they will forgive." "No," he said sharply, looking up at her. "Absolutely not. We knew this was coming, Grishka. We knew it would be hard. I did not think they would threaten your entire livelihood." Her voice cracked. "I did not think loving me would mean losing everything." He grabbed her shoulders, making her meet his eyes. "You are not losing me everything. They are doing that with their prejudice and their hate, and I will not reward them by giving in. We will figure this out. Together." "How? How will we manage a farm alone? You know how much work the harvest is. You know how much we need help to get it all in before the frost comes." Ethan did know. The wheat was nearly ready, and after that would come the late vegetables. It was back-breaking work even with hired help, and trying to do it with just the 2 of them would be nearly impossible. but he set his jaw stubbornly. "We will work harder, longer hours. We will do what we have to do." Grishka looked at him with something like wonder and despair mixed together. Then she leaned in and kissed him hard, a kiss that tasted like salt because she was crying. "You are a fool, Ethan Dalmore," she whispered against his lips. "A wonderful, stubborn fool, and I love you so much it terrifies me." "Then we will be terrified together," he said, and he held her while she cried into his shoulder, her arms wrapped around him like she was afraid he might disappear. The next 6 weeks were the hardest of Ethan's life. True to their word, his neighbors cut him off completely. When he went to the village to buy supplies, he was met with cold stares and marked up prices. Thomas refused to repair the plow blade that broke halfway through the harvest, forcing Ethan to spend precious time trying to fix it himself with limited success. No one answered his calls for help during the wheat harvest, leaving him and Grishka to work from dawn until long after dark, cutting and bundling and hauling the grain until their hands bled and their backs screamed in protest. Grishka worked with a ferocity that amazed and worried him. She seemed determined to prove that she was worth the price he was paying, lifting loads that made his muscles quail and working through exhaustion that would have felled most people. He caught her more than once pushing herself past safe limits, and they had arguments that ended with both of them shouting before collapsing into each other's arms, too tired to stay angry. "You are going to hurt yourself," Ethan said one evening after finding her still in the field when it was too dark to see properly. She had been bundling wheat by moonlight, her movements mechanical with fatigue. "We are behind schedule," she replied without stopping. "If we do not get this in before the frost, we will lose half the crop. And if you collapse from exhaustion, we will lose all of it because I cannot do this without you." He grabbed the bundle from her hands and threw it down. "Grishka, stop, please. You have been working for 16 hours straight, so have you. And I am about to fall over. Come inside. We will start again at dawn." She finally looked at him, and in the moonlight he saw how hollow her eyes had become, how much weight she had lost. It scared him. "This is my fault," she said quietly, "all of this. If I had just stayed in the cottage, kept things professional, none of this would be happening." "Stop," Ethan said firmly. He cupped her face in his hands, making her look at him. "This is not your fault. It is the fault of every person who chose to punish us for loving each other. And yes, it is hard. Yes, I am tired and scared, and I do not know if we are going to make it through the winter. But I do not regret one single moment with you, Grishka. Not one. Do you understand me?" Her eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, leaning into his touch. "I do not regret it either," she whispered. "I just wish it did not cost you so much. You are worth it," he said simply, and he kissed her forehead before leading her back to the house. They made it through the wheat harvest by the skin of their teeth, getting the last of it stored in the barn just 2 days before the first frost hit. Ethan calculated their yield and felt a mixture of relief and dread. They had enough grain to see them through the winter and to sell for basic supplies, but it was far less than previous years, and there would be no buffer for emergencies. The vegetable harvest was even more brutal. The pumpkins and squash were ready all at once, and getting them picked and stored before they froze required round-the-clock work. Ethan and Grishka took turns sleeping in shifts, one always working while the other rested for a few hours. Ethan lost track of days, moving through a haze of exhaustion and determination. It was during this period that he truly came to understand Grishka's strength. Not just her physical power, which was considerable, but her mental fortitude. She never complained, never suggested again that she should leave. Instead, she matched him hour for hour, working until her hands were raw and her body shook with fatigue, and then getting up to do it all again. At night, When they collapsed into bed together, they held each other with a desperation born of shared struggle. Their physical intimacy remained chaste, both of them too exhausted for more than kissing and quiet words of encouragement, but the emotional bond between them deepened into something unbreakable. They were in this together, come what may, and that knowledge became a source of strength. By the time they got the last of the vegetables stored in the root cellar, the first snow had begun to fall. Ethan stood in the farmyard, watching the white flakes drift down, and felt something loosen in his chest. They had done it. Against all odds, with no help and active sabotage from their community, they had brought in the harvest. They would survive the winter. Grishka came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his waist and resting her cheek against his back. She was so warm, so solid and real, and Ethan covered her hands with his own. "We did it," he said. "You did it," she corrected. "You refused to give up." "We did it together," he insisted, turning in her arms to face her. "And now we have months of winter where we can rest and recover and just be together without working ourselves to death." She smiled, and it was like the sun coming out. "That does sound nice. Come on," he said, taking her hand. "Let's go inside. I want to celebrate." They spent that evening by the fire, drinking the last bottle of good wine Ethan had been saving and talking about everything and nothing. For the first time in weeks, they were not planning work or worrying about the harvest. They were simply together, and it felt like a luxury. As the fire burned low and the wine made them both pleasantly warm, Grishka shifted closer to Ethan on the floor where they sat, her head resting on his shoulder. "Ethan," she said, her voice quiet, "can I ask you something? Anything? Do you ever regret it? Truly?" "Not the harvest or the work, but all of it. The isolation, the threats, the way your life has changed because of me." He was quiet for a moment, considering his answer carefully, because he knew she needed honesty. "Sometimes I get scared," he admitted. "I wonder if we will make it, if the community will ever accept us, if we will always be alone out here. But regret? No, never. Because even on the hardest days, even when I am so tired I can barely stand, I look at you and I know that this is where I am supposed to be. You are who I am supposed to be with, and everything else is just noise." She lifted her head to look at him, her dark eyes shining with emotion. "I never thought I would have this. Someone who sees me, truly sees me and chooses me anyway. Someone who fights for me. You have given me something I thought was impossible, Ethan. You have given me a home." The word settled between them, heavy with meaning. A home. Not just a place to stay, but a true home with someone who loved her. Ethan leaned in and kissed her, slow and deep, tasting wine and promise. When they broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I want more than that," he said. "I want to give you a life. A real life, here with me. I want to wake up beside you every morning for the rest of my days. I want to build something that is ours, that no one can take from us." "You already have," she whispered. "Not yet," he said. "But I will. I promise you, Grishka, I will make a life for us where you never have to be afraid or alone again." She kissed him again, harder this time, and there was hunger in it that had been banked for weeks beneath exhaustion. Ethan felt heat rush through him as her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer. When they broke apart, they were both breathing hard. "Take me to bed," Grishka said, her voice low and rough. "Not to sleep, not tonight." Ethan's heart hammered in his chest. "Are you sure?" "I am sure." She cupped his face in her hands. "I love you, Ethan. I want to be with you in every way. I want to show you what you mean to me." He needed no more convincing. He stood and pulled her up with him, and they made their way to the bedroom, hands clasped, anticipation singing through both of them. What passed between them that night was tender and passionate, a joining that felt both inevitable and profound. Ethan learned the map of Grishka's body, the way she sighed when he kissed the sensitive spot behind her ear, the way her nails dug into his shoulders when pleasure overcame her. She was strong and soft and beautiful, and when they finally came together, moving as one, Ethan felt like every choice he had made had led to this moment. Afterward, they lay tangled together, skin against skin, hearts beating in synchrony. Grishka traced idle patterns on Ethan's chest, her expression peaceful in a way he had never seen before. "I never knew it could be like that," she said softly. "Gentle and fierce at the same time." "Neither did I," Ethan admitted. He had been with women before, brief encounters that had been more physical than emotional, but this was entirely different. This was making love in the truest sense, and it had shaken him to his core. Grishka propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with such tenderness that it made his throat tight. "Whatever comes, we face it together. Promise me." "I promise," he said, and he pulled her down into another kiss, sealing the vow. Winter settled over the farm like a quiet blanket, and for the first time in months, Ethan and Grishka had time to simply be. They fell into a peaceful routine, tending the animals, keeping the house warm, and spending long evenings by the fire talking and reading and making love. It felt like a respite, a chance to heal from the brutal harvest season and grow even closer. But the isolation was hard. Ethan had always been a sociable person, someone who enjoyed the camaraderie of the village and the help-your-neighbor mentality of farming communities. Being cut off from all of that wore on him, though he tried not to show it. He could see it wore on Grishka too, despite her efforts to seem content. She had already been alone for so long before coming to his farm, and he knew she had hoped, as he had, that they might find a way to build a bridge between her and the human community. Instead, they had been driven further into exile. The loneliness became more acute when winter storms trapped them inside for days at a time. They talked about everything, learning the details of each other's lives with the thoroughness of people who had nothing but time. Grishka told him about her childhood in the Orc clan, about the harsh mountains where they had lived, and the even harsher rules that governed Orc society. She told him about her mother, a warrior who had died in a border skirmish with humans when Grishka was young, and her father, who had never forgiven her for helping that lost human child. Orcs believe that strength is everything. She explained one snowy afternoon as they sat by the fire. "Compassion is seen as weakness. My clan called me soft, but it was worse than that. They said I was corrupted by human sentiment, that I would bring shame to our people. When they cast me out, they said it would have been kinder to kill me." Ethan felt a surge of protective anger. "That is barbaric. It is their way," Grishka said with a shrug, but he could see the old hurt in her eyes. "I do not blame them entirely. Humans and orcs have been at war for generations. There is blood and grief on both sides. My mother died because human soldiers attacked our settlement. My clan has lost so many people to your kind. In their eyes, I betrayed that loss by showing mercy." "But you did not betray anything," Ethan insisted. "You saved a child. That is not weakness or betrayal, that is being a good person." She smiled sadly. "I like to think so. But it has made me an outcast from both worlds. Orcs see me as a traitor and humans see me as a monster. Until I met you, I thought that would be my life forever, moving from place to place, never belonging anywhere." "You belong here," Ethan said fiercely. "With me. And I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never doubt that." She leaned in and kissed him, slow and sweet, and they did not speak of it again that day. But Ethan thought about her words long into the night. He thought about the unfairness of a world that could not see past old hatreds, and he wondered if there was any way to change it. The answer came in an unexpected form near the end of winter. They were just finishing the evening chores when they heard the sound of shouting coming from the direction of the main road. Ethan and Grishka exchanged a glance and moved cautiously toward the noise. As they reached the edge of his property, they saw a sight that made Ethan's blood run cold. A wagon had overturned on the icy road, and a woman was screaming for help. Next to the wagon, a man lay motionless in the snow, and two small children were crying. As Ethan watched, he saw movement in the trees beyond wolves, drawn by the smell of blood and the sound of distress. "Stay here," Ethan said to Grishka, already moving forward, but she grabbed his arm. "No, you will need help, and I am stronger than you." Her eyes met his, and in them he saw determination and fear mixed together. "Those are the Fletcher children, Bernard's grandchildren." Ethan's stomach dropped. Bernard Fletcher, the man who had threatened him, who had tried to drive Grishka away. His family was in danger, and they were on the road that bordered Ethan's property. He could turn away. After everything Bernard had done, he would be justified in leaving the man's family to their fate. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he knew he would not. Could not. "Come on," he said, and they ran toward the overturned wagon. The woman, whom Ethan recognized as Bernard's daughter Emma, stared at them with wide, terrified eyes as they approached, her gaze fixed on Grishka, and for a moment Ethan saw her flinch back. But then the wolves emerged from the trees, three of them, lean and hungry, and Emma's fear shifted focus. "Please," she gasped. "My father, he is trapped under the wagon, I cannot move it. And the wolves, get the children behind us," Ethan barked, positioning himself between the wolves and the wagon. Grishka was already moving to the overturned wagon, her impressive strength allowing her to grip the side and heave. The wagon shifted but did not lift enough to free Bernard, who Ethan could now see was pinned beneath it, unconscious. The wolves advanced, sensing easy prey. Ethan grabbed a thick branch from the side of the road and brandished it, shouting to make himself seem larger and more threatening. One of the wolves lunged, and he swung the branch hard, catching it across the snout. It yelped and retreated, but the other two circled, looking for an opening. "Ethan, I cannot lift it alone," Grishka called, her voice strained with effort. Emma stood frozen, clutching her children, and Ethan made a split-second decision. He threw the branch at the nearest wolf and ran to Grishka's side, grabbing the wagon's edge. Together, they heaved with all their strength, muscles screaming in protest. The wagon rose inch by agonizing inch. "Emma, pull him out," Ethan shouted. Emma seemed to shake herself from her terror and rushed forward, grabbing her father under the arms and dragging him clear. The moment he was free, Ethan and Grishka dropped the wagon and turned back to the wolves. But the wolves had not attacked Emma or the children. Instead, they were backing away, intimidated by Grishka's size and the united front she and Ethan presented. With a few more shouts and threatening gestures, the pack turned and loped back into the forest. For a moment, everyone stood in the snow, breathing hard. Then Emma spoke, her voice shaking. "Thank you. I do not know what we would have done if you had not come." Father hit a patch of ice and lost control of the wagon, and when it overturned, he struck his head. She looked at Grishka, and Ethan saw the conflict in her expression, gratitude warring with years of taught prejudice. "You saved him, both of you." Grishka nodded stiffly. "We should get him inside and warm. He needs to be checked for injuries." Working together, they managed to get Bernard onto a makeshift stretcher and carried him back to Ethan's farmhouse. Emma followed with her two children, a boy of about 6 and a girl who could not have been more than 4, both of them staring at Grishka with wide, frightened eyes. Inside, they laid Bernard on Ethan's bed, and Grishka examined him with a competence that surprised Emma. She checked his pupils, felt along his skull for fractures, and assessed his breathing. "He has a concussion," Grishka said finally, "but I do not think his skull is fractured. He should wake soon, but he will need rest and watching. How do you know this? Emma asked. I have tended injuries before, Grishka said simply. Among my clan, everyone learns basic healing. Orc warriors are often injured, and we cannot always rely on shamans. Emma absorbed this, her preconceptions visibly shaking. She looked around the farmhouse, taking in the tidy kitchen, the cozy fire, the obvious signs of a well-kept home. Her eyes landed on the mantel, where Ethan had carved both his and Grishka's initials into the wood in a moment of romantic foolishness. Emma's expression shifted to something unreadable. I will make tea, Ethan said, needing something to do with his hands. As he worked, he was acutely aware of the tension in the room. Emma sat with her children, who had finally stopped crying but still watched Grishka with a mixture of curiosity and wariness. Grishka hovered near Bernard, checking his breathing periodically, her posture stiff and defensive. When Bernard finally began to stir an hour later, the first thing he saw when he opened his eyes was Grishka's face leaning over him. He recoiled instinctively, confusion and fear flashing across his features. Father, wait, Emma said quickly, moving to his side. She saved you. They both did. The wagon overturned, and if Ethan and Grishka had not come, the wolves would have killed us all. Bernard looked from his daughter to Grishka to Ethan, and a complex series of emotions played across his weathered face. Shame, confusion, and something that might have been grudging respect warred for dominance. You saved my family, he said hoarsely, looking at Ethan. After everything I said to you, after everything I did. Yes, Ethan said simply. He was not going to make this easy. Bernard had earned this discomfort. Why? Because it was the right thing to do, Ethan replied. Because they needed help and I was there. It is not complicated, Bernard. The older man's gaze shifted to Grishka. And you, why would you help the family of a man who threatened you? Grishka met his eyes steadily. For the same reason, because you needed help, and because I am not the monster you think I am. Silence fell, heavy and charged. Then, slowly, Bernard pushed himself up to sitting, wincing at the pain in his head. Emma moved to support him, but he waved her off gently. I owe you an apology, he said, the words clearly difficult for him. Both of you. I let fear and old prejudices guide my actions, and I nearly cost my family their lives because of it. If you had not been here, if you had turned us away as you had every right to do. He trailed off, his voice thick. I am sorry, truly. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest, though he kept his expression neutral. Words are easy, Bernard. Your actions these past months have made our lives very difficult. I know, and I will work to make it right. Bernard looked at Grishka again. You are not what I expected. My daughter tells me you have medical knowledge, that you knew how to treat my injury. That you lifted the wagon that would have killed me. I have been a fool. Yes, you have, Grishka said bluntly, and Ethan saw the ghost of a smile on her lips. But I appreciate you saying so. They kept Bernard and his family overnight, the older man needing rest before he could safely travel. The children, once their initial fear wore off, became fascinated by Grishka. The little girl, whose name was Lily, worked up the courage to ask if Grishka's tusks hurt, and Grishka patiently explained that they were like teeth, part of her body, and no, they did not hurt at all. By morning, the atmosphere had thawed considerably. Emma helped make breakfast, working alongside Grishka in the kitchen with careful politeness that was slowly warming into something more genuine. Bernard sat at the table, watching them, and Ethan could see the man's worldview being forcibly rearranged. Before they left, Bernard pulled Ethan aside. I meant what I said, he told him. I was wrong, and I will make it right. I will speak to the others in the village. I cannot promise everyone will change their minds, but I will tell them what happened here. I will tell them what you both did for my family." "That is all I ask," Ethan said. "We do not need everyone to like us. We just need to be left in peace to live our lives." Bernard nodded and offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, Ethan shook it. It was not forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. As Bernard's family departed in a borrowed wagon, Ethan would help him retrieve his own once it was repaired. Grishka came to stand beside Ethan, watching them go. "Do you think it will make a difference?" she asked quietly. "I do not know," Ethan admitted, "but it is more hope than we had yesterday." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they stood together in the winter sunshine, feeling the first tentative stirrings of possibility. Spring came slowly to the farm, the snow melting in fits and starts and the ground thawing into mud before finally drying enough to work. Ethan and Grishka began preparing for the new planting season, and as they worked, they noticed a change. It started small. Thomas the blacksmith appeared one morning with Ethan's repaired plow blade, refusing payment and mumbling an awkward apology before leaving quickly. A few days later, Emma Fletcher arrived with a basket of early spring vegetables from her greenhouse and an invitation for Grishka to visit if she wanted to learn some cooking techniques. Then, as planting season approached, something happened that Ethan had not dared to hope for. People began to answer his call for help. Not everyone. Some of his neighbors still refused to set foot on his property or acknowledge him in the village. But enough came that the work became manageable. Bernard himself showed up with 3 of his farmhands, ready to help plow and plant. When Ethan tried to thank him, Bernard just shook his head. "I owe you a debt," he said gruffly. "Besides, I have been watching how hard you two have worked this winter, and it shames me." No one should have to work that hard alone. Others came for different reasons. Some were curious about the orc woman who had saved Bernard Fletcher. Some came because they admired Ethan's stubborn loyalty. A few came because they were lonely outcasts themselves and saw in Ethan and Grishka something they wanted, a love that defied conventions. Grishka handled the attention with cautious grace. She worked alongside the human farmhands, demonstrating her strength and skill, and slowly, tentatively, some of them began to talk to her, to ask her questions, to see her as a person rather than a monster. It was not perfect. There were still stares and whispered comments. Some people would not look Grishka in the eye or speak to her directly. But it was progress, and that was more than they had dared to dream of. The turning point came in late spring, during the village festival that celebrated the planting season. Ethan had not planned to attend, assuming they would not be welcome, but Emma appeared at their door the day before and personally invited them. "Please come," she said. "Father wants you there, and honestly, so do I. People need to see that you are part of this community, whether they like it or not." So Ethan and Grishka dressed in their best clothes and walked into Millbrook together, hand in hand. The festival was held in the village square, with tables of food, a makeshift stage for music and dancing, and various competitions and games. As they approached, conversation died, and every eye turned toward them. Ethan felt Grishka's hand tighten on his, but he kept walking, his head held high. They had every right to be here, and he would be damned if he would let anyone make them feel otherwise. Bernard was the first to approach. He was dressed in his formal clothes, clearly having been holding court as one of the village elders, and behind him stood Emma and her family. Bernard looked at Ethan and Grishka, then at the crowd of watching villagers, and raised his voice. "I want to tell you all a story," he began. "This winter, my daughter and grandchildren nearly died. Our wagon overturned on an icy road, and I was pinned, unconscious. Wolves were circling, and there was no help in sight. We would have died there, frozen or torn apart, if not for 2 people." He gestured to Ethan and Grishka. These two people heard our cries and came running. They drove off the wolves. They lifted a wagon I could not have moved with 10 men. They brought us into their home and tended to my injuries. They saved my family, even though I had treated them shamefully. The crowd was silent, listening. Bernard's voice grew stronger. I learned something that night. I learned that I had been a bigoted old fool, letting fear and old stories guide my judgment instead of seeing what was right in front of me. Grishka is an orc, yes, but she is also a skilled healer, a tireless worker, and a good person. She and Ethan have done nothing but work hard and care for each other, and we repaid them with threats and exile. He paused, his gaze sweeping the crowd. I am ashamed of how I acted, and I am grateful beyond words that they were better people than I was. I hope you all will join me in welcoming them properly to our community. For a long, agonizing moment, no one moved. Then Thomas the blacksmith stepped forward, nodding at Ethan and Grishka. You have a place here, he said gruffly. I was wrong too. One by one, others came forward. Not everyone, but enough. Enough that when the music started and couples began to dance, Ethan felt safe pulling Grishka onto the makeshift dance floor. She was stiff with nerves at first, hyper-aware of the eyes on them, but as Ethan spun her around, humming along to the fiddle music, she began to relax. They are watching us, she murmured. Let them watch, Ethan replied. Let them see how much I love you. Let them see that we are not going anywhere. She smiled then, genuine and bright, and when the song ended, a few people actually applauded. It was tentative, uncertain, but it was applause nonetheless. They spent the rest of the festival mingling cautiously with the villagers. Some still avoided them, but others made an effort to be friendly. Emma introduced Grishka to some of the other women, and while the conversation was stilted, it was civil. Bernard pulled Ethan aside to discuss farming techniques, treating him with a respect that had been absent before. As the sun began to set and lanterns were lit around the square, Ethan and Grishka found themselves standing at the edge of the festivities, watching the children play and the adults dance. Grishka leaned against Ethan, her head on his shoulder, and he wrapped his arm around her waist. This is more than I ever hoped for, she said quietly. I thought we would always be alone. We are not alone anymore, Ethan replied. We have each other, and now we have at least some of the community. It is not perfect, but it is a start. It is a good start, she agreed. Then she turned to look at him, her expression serious. Ethan, I want to talk to you about something. All right. I have been thinking about the future, about what it means for us to build a life here, and I realize that I want more than just to live with you and work your farm. I want to make it official. I want to bind my life to yours in a way that everyone can see and acknowledge. She took a deep breath. I want to marry you, Ethan Dalmore, if you will have me. Ethan's heart stopped, then started again at triple speed. He stared at her, this strong, beautiful, brave woman who had given him everything and was now offering him more. If I will have you, he repeated, his voice cracking slightly. Grishka, I have been trying to work up the courage to ask you the same thing for weeks. I thought you might think it was too soon, or that it would make things harder, or she kissed him, cutting off his rambling, and when she pulled back she was laughing. Is that a yes? Yes, he said fervently. 1,000 times yes. I want to marry you more than I have ever wanted anything. I want you to be my wife, my partner, my everything. Her eyes shone with tears, and she pulled him into another kiss, this one deep and joyful. Around them, Ethan was dimly aware that people were watching, that their display was causing whispers and exclamations. He did not care. All that mattered was Grishka in his arms, saying yes, choosing him, choosing this life they were building together. When they finally broke apart, Emma was approaching with a wide smile. Did I just see what I think I saw? she asked. "We are getting married," Ethan announced, unable to keep the grin off his face. Emma's smile widened. "That is wonderful. We will have to throw you a proper wedding. Oh, this will be the talk of the village for months." "Let them talk," Grishka said, but she was smiling too, her hand clasped tightly in Ethan's. The news spread through the festival like wildfire, and reactions were mixed. Some people congratulated them with genuine warmth. Others looked scandalized or disapproving. But Ethan and Grishka faced it together, united and happy, and nothing anyone said could dim the joy they felt. They married 6 weeks later in a ceremony that was equal parts traditional and unprecedented. The village priest, an elderly man named Father Gregory, initially refused to perform the ceremony, citing concerns about interspecies unions. But Bernard Fletcher, of all people, intervened. "Either you marry them, or I will find someone who will," Bernard told the priest bluntly. "These two have proven their love and their commitment to each other 100 times over. They deserve to have their union blessed." Faced with Bernard's determination, and the fact that a significant portion of the village now supported Ethan and Grishka, Father Gregory reluctantly agreed. The ceremony was held in the village square on a warm summer day, with flowers blooming and the sun shining down on them like a benediction. Grishka wore a dress that Emma and some of the other village women had helped her make. A simple but lovely creation in green that matched her skin and brought out the warmth in her eyes. Ethan wore his best suit, the one his father had worn to his own wedding, and he thought he might burst with pride and happiness as Grishka walked toward him. The ceremony itself was brief. Father Gregory spoke the traditional words about love and commitment, and Ethan and Grishka repeated their vows in clear, strong voices. When it came time to exchange rings, Ethan slipped a simple band of silver onto Grishka's finger, and she did the same for him. The rings had been made by Thomas the blacksmith, who had refused payment and told them gruffly that it was his wedding gift to them. "You may kiss your bride," Father Gregory said, and Ethan did not need to be told twice. He pulled Grishka into his arms and kissed her deeply, hearing cheers and applause rising around them. When they broke apart, Grishka was crying, tears streaming down her green cheeks, and Ethan brushed them away gently. "Happy tears?" he asked. "The happiest," she confirmed. The celebration that followed was joyous and rowdy. Tables groaned under the weight of food contributed by various villagers. Music played, and people danced. Bernard gave a toast that was surprisingly eloquent, speaking about the power of love to overcome prejudice and the strength it took to stand by your convictions. Even some of the people who had been most opposed to their relationship seemed caught up in the festive atmosphere, and while Ethan knew they had not won everyone over, he felt hopeful about the future. As evening fell and lanterns were lit, Ethan and Grishka slipped away from the festivities, walking hand in hand back toward their farm. The moon was rising, full and bright, and the summer air was warm and sweet with the scent of growing things. "We did it," Grishka said as they walked. "We actually did it. We got married and the village did not burn us at the stake," Ethan laughed. "I think we set the bar a little low with not getting burned at the stake, but yes, we did it. You are my wife now, my actual wife, and you are my husband." She said the word like it was precious, something to be savored. "I have a husband, a home, a place in this community. I never thought I would have any of those things." "Well, now you have all of them," Ethan said. He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "And you will always have them. I promise you, Grishka, I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you know how loved and valued you are." She pulled him down into a kiss, and they stood there in the moonlight, two people from different worlds who had found a way to build a bridge between them. When they finally made it back to the farmhouse, they were both eager and laughing, and the night they spent as newlyweds was everything Ethan had dreamed of and more. The months that followed their wedding were the happiest of Ethan's life. He and Grishka settled into married life with an ease that felt natural, as if they had been made for each other. They worked the farm together, their skills complementing each other perfectly. Grishka's strength and endurance balanced Ethan's knowledge of the land and his experience with local crops. Together, they brought in a harvest that was better than any Ethan had managed alone. Their relationship with the village continued to improve, though it was not without setbacks. There were still people who refused to accept their marriage, who muttered about abominations and unnatural unions when they thought Ethan and Grishka could not hear. But there were also people who defended them, who stood up when insults were thrown and made it clear that Ethan and Grishka were part of the community now. Like it or not, Bernard Fletcher became an unlikely ally and friend. He stopped by the farm regularly, ostensibly to discuss farming matters but often staying for dinner and conversation. His grandchildren adored Grishka, who had a seemingly endless patience for their questions and games. Little Lily took to following Grishka around whenever the family visited, chattering about everything and nothing, and Ethan often caught Grishka watching the child with an expression of such longing that it made his heart ache. One evening, after the Fletchers had left and Ethan and Grishka were cleaning up from dinner, he brought it up. "You are good with children," he observed, watching Grishka wipe down the table. She smiled. "They are easy to be good with. They have not learned to hate yet." "I have been thinking," Ethan said carefully, "about the future, about what we want our life to look like." Grishka paused, her cloth stilling on the table. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you want children? Someday, I mean, with me." The question hung in the air between them. Grishka's expression went through several shifts: surprise, longing, fear, hope. "I do not know if that is possible," she said slowly. "Orcs and humans are different species. I have never heard of such a union producing children." "But you do not know that it is impossible either," Ethan pressed. "And even if we cannot have children of our own, there are other options. Orphans who need homes. Children who—" "Ethan, stop," Grishka interrupted gently. She came around the table and took his hands. "Are you asking me if I want to be a mother?" "Yes," he said simply, her eyes filled with tears. "I have wanted to be a mother my whole life. When I was young, before I was cast out, I used to imagine having a family, teaching my children the ways of our clan, watching them grow strong and capable. And then I was exiled, and I thought that dream was dead. That no orc would ever want me, and certainly no human would either." She squeezed his hands. "You have already given me more than I ever thought I would have. But yes, if it is possible, I would love nothing more than to have children with you." Ethan pulled her into a tight embrace, feeling the rightness of this decision settle over him. "Then we will try. And if it does not work, we will find another way. I want to fill this house with laughter and noise and the sound of little feet running around. I want to build a family with you, Grishka." She buried her face in his neck and he felt her tears on his skin. "I love you so much," she whispered. "Sometimes I cannot believe this is real, that I have you, that I have this life." "It is real," he assured her, "and it is only going to get better." They began trying for a child in earnest after that conversation, though neither of them truly knew if it was possible. Months passed with no results, and Ethan could see the hope slowly draining from Grishka's eyes each time her monthly courses came. He tried to reassure her, tried to keep his own disappointment from showing, but it was hard. Then, as autumn began to paint the trees in shades of red and gold, Grishka woke one morning and immediately ran outside to be sick. Ethan followed her, alarmed, and found her kneeling in the dirt, retching violently. "Are you all right?" "Should I fetch the healer?" he asked, rubbing her back. Grishka shook her head, gasping for breath. "No, I do not think I am sick. I think—" She stopped, her eyes going wide. "Ethan, I have not had my courses in almost 2 months. I did not think anything of it because they have been irregular since I was exiled, stress and poor eating, but combined with this." She looked up at him, hope and fear warring in her expression. "I think I might be pregnant." Ethan felt the world tilt on its axis. "Are you sure?" "No, but the signs are there, the sickness, the missed courses, and I have been so tired lately." She got to her feet, legs shaking. "We need to see a healer, someone who can tell us for certain." They went to the village that day, seeking out the healer, an older woman named Meredith who had been practicing her craft for 40 years. She was one of the villagers who had been cautiously friendly toward Grishka, treating her with professional courtesy if not warmth. When they explained why they had come, Meredith's eyebrows rose, but she gestured for Grishka to lie down on her examination table. The examination was thorough and somewhat uncomfortable, but Meredith worked with efficient competence. When she was done, she stood back and looked at Ethan and Grishka with an expression that was equal parts amazement and confusion. "You are pregnant," she confirmed. "About 2 months along, I would say. The child seems healthy, and you are showing all the normal signs of early pregnancy." Ethan felt his knees go weak with relief and joy. Grishka sat up, her hand going to her stomach in a protective gesture that was already becoming familiar. "How is this possible?" Grishka asked. "I have never heard of a human and orc producing a child together." Meredith shook her head. "Neither have I, in truth. But life finds a way, as they say. Perhaps humans and orcs are not as different as we like to think, or perhaps your love was strong enough to overcome the barriers of species." She smiled, and it was genuine. "Whatever the reason, congratulations. You are going to be parents." They walked home in a daze, holding hands, neither of them quite able to believe it. When they reached the farm, Ethan swept Grishka into his arms and spun her around, laughing with pure joy. "We are having a baby," he said, setting her down gently. "We are actually having a baby." Grishka laughed too, tears streaming down her face. "I know. I cannot believe it. After everything, after all the impossibilities we have already overcome, somehow this is the one that seems most miraculous." They spent that evening talking about the future, making plans and dreaming aloud. They talked about names and whether the baby would look more human or more orc. They talked about how they would raise the child, what values they would teach, how they would protect their son or daughter from the prejudice that still existed in the world. "Our child will be unique," Grishka said as they lay in bed that night, Ethan's hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Neither fully human nor fully orc. They will not fit neatly into either world." "Then we will make sure they know that is a strength, not a weakness," Ethan replied. "We will teach them to be proud of who they are, to embrace both sides of their heritage. And we will love them so fiercely that they never doubt their place in this world." Grishka turned to look at him, her eyes shining. "You are going to be an amazing father." "And you are going to be an amazing mother," he replied, kissing her forehead. "Our child is going to be so lucky to have you." They fell asleep wrapped in each other's arms, dreaming of the future they were building together. The news of Grishka's pregnancy spread through the village with predictable speed, and reactions were varied. Some people were genuinely happy for them, offering congratulations and practical gifts like baby clothes and carved wooden toys. Emma Fletcher was especially delighted, already planning all the ways Lily could help with the baby when it arrived. But there were also people who reacted with horror and disgust. Ethan overheard more than one conversation in the village about abominations and monstrous half-breeds, and it took all his self-control not to start another fight. Grishka bore the insults with her usual stoic grace, but he could see how they wounded her, especially now that she was carrying their child. The worst incident came about 4 months into the pregnancy. Grishka had gone to the village to buy fabric for making baby clothes, and Ethan had stayed behind to finish some repair work on the barn. When she returned home several hours later, she was pale and shaking, and Ethan immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? He demanded, pulling her into the house. "Some men in the village," she said, her voice tight. "They were drunk and they started saying things about the baby, about what it would be. They called it a monster. They said it should be destroyed before it was born, before it could hurt anyone." Her hands went protectively to her now visible belly. One of them even suggested that they could take care of the problem, that it would be a mercy. Ethan saw red. Who said this? Ethan, no. Grishka grabbed his arm as he started for the door. "It will only make things worse. Please." "They threatened our child," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "They threatened you. I cannot just let that go. And what will you do? Start another brawl? Get yourself hurt or arrested?" She cupped his face in her hands, making him look at her. "I need you here with me. I need you whole and safe. Please, Ethan, do not let them provoke you into something we will both regret." He wanted to argue, wanted to find the men who had threatened his wife and unborn child and make them pay. But the fear in Grishka's eyes stopped him. She was right. He could not protect her if he was hurt or in trouble. So he forced himself to breathe, to calm down, to focus on what mattered. "All right," he said finally, "but we are not going back to the village for a while. And if anyone comes here and makes threats, I will defend you and our child with everything I have." "I know you will," she said softly, and she let him hold her for a long time, both of them taking comfort from each other's presence. The incident left them both shaken, but it also galvanized their supporters. Bernard Fletcher, when he heard what had happened, was furious. He tracked down the men responsible and, by all accounts, gave them a tongue lashing that left them thoroughly chastised. Other villagers who had been cautiously friendly became more openly supportive, making a point to check on Grishka and offering to help with anything she needed. As her pregnancy progressed, Grishka bloomed. Despite the morning sickness and the aches and pains that came with carrying a child, she seemed happier and more at peace than Ethan had ever seen her. Her hand was constantly on her belly, and she talked to the baby all the time, telling it stories about the farm and about the life they were building. Ethan was equally entranced by the changes in her body and the reality of the life growing inside her. He spent hours with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move. They argued good-naturedly about names. Ethan wanted something traditional, while Grishka preferred names from orc culture. Eventually they compromised, deciding that if the baby was a boy, they would name him Eric, a name that felt both human and strong enough to honor Grishka's heritage. If it was a girl, they would name her Kara, which meant strong in the orc language. As winter approached and Grishka's due date drew nearer, they made careful preparations. Meredith, the healer, agreed to attend the birth, though she admitted she had no idea what to expect from a half-orc baby. Emma Fletcher offered to be there as well, to help with whatever was needed, and Grishka accepted gratefully. The baby came on a cold winter night, 3 weeks before the due date that Meredith had estimated. Grishka woke Ethan with a gasp, her hand clutching her belly, and he immediately knew it was time. He sent for Meredith and Emma while helping Grishka through the contractions, his own heart pounding with fear and anticipation. The labor was long and difficult. Orc babies, it turned out, were larger than human babies, and even though their child was only half orc, the birth was complicated. Grishka labored for 12 hours, her face contorted with pain, and there were moments when Ethan feared they might lose her, lose the baby, lose everything they had built. But Grishka was strong, stronger than anyone he had ever known, and she fought through the pain with gritted determination. And finally, as dawn broke over the farm, filling the bedroom with pale winter light, their child entered the world with a lusty cry. "It is a boy," Meredith announced, her voice filled with wonder. "A healthy baby boy." She cleaned the infant and wrapped him in a soft blanket before handing him to Grishka, who cradled him with shaking hands and a face full of awe. Ethan leaned over them both, looking down at his son for the first time, and felt his heart expand so much it hurt. The baby was beautiful. He had his mother's green skin, though it was a lighter shade, almost olive. His ears were slightly pointed, and when he yawned, Ethan could see tiny nubs that would eventually become tusks. But his eyes, when he opened them, were a clear blue like Ethan's, and his features were a perfect blend of both parents. "Eric," Grishka whispered, running a gentle finger down the baby's cheek. "Our Eric." "He is perfect," Ethan said, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect." "You did so well, Grishka. I am so proud of you." She looked up at him, exhausted but radiant with joy. "We have a son, Ethan. We have a family." He kissed her forehead, then gently kissed Eric's tiny head. "Yes, we do. We have everything." The weeks that followed were a blur of sleepless nights and endless wonder. Eric was a good baby, healthy and strong, and watching him grow and change was the most amazing thing Ethan had ever experienced. Grishka took to motherhood with natural grace, nursing Eric and caring for him with a tenderness that made Ethan fall in love with her all over again. The village's reaction to Eric was mixed, as expected. Some people came to visit, cooing over the baby and bringing gifts. Bernard's grandchildren were particularly fascinated, with little Lily declaring that Eric was the most beautiful baby she had ever seen, even if he was green. But there were others who stayed away, who continued to mutter about abominations and refused to acknowledge the child's existence. Ethan found he cared less and less about those people. He had his family, and that was what mattered. Let the bigots stew in their own hatred. He was too busy being happy to waste energy on them. As spring arrived and Eric grew from a tiny infant into a robust baby who could lift his head and smile, Ethan and Grishka settled into their new roles as parents. They worked the farm together, taking turns caring for Eric, and their love for each other only deepened as they shared the joys and challenges of raising their son. One warm spring evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset with Eric asleep in Grishka's arms, Ethan reflected on how much their lives had changed. "You remember the night in the tavern?" he asked. "When that drunk insulted you and I threw the first punch?" Grishka smiled. "I remember. I thought you were crazy. I thought you were going to get yourself killed and it would be my fault." "I was crazy," Ethan admitted. "Crazy in love with you, even if I had not admitted it yet. I could not stand hearing him say those things about you." "That was the night everything changed," Grishka said softly. "That was the night I let myself hope that maybe, just maybe, I could have something real with you. And now look at us," Ethan said, gesturing at their farm, at their sleeping son, at the life they had built. "We have everything we ever wanted and more." Grishka leaned her head on his shoulder, careful not to disturb Eric. "I used to think I was cursed, cast out of my clan, rejected by humans, alone in the world with no place to belong. But I was not cursed. I was being led here to you, to this farm, to this life." "I think we were being led to each other," Ethan said. "Two people who did not fit into the worlds we were born into, finding a way to make our own world together." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the sky turn from gold to pink to deep purple. Inside the house, Ethan could see the warm glow of lamplight through the windows, and he thought about all the evenings they would spend here, watching their son grow, maybe having more children, building a legacy that would outlast them both. "I want more of this," Grishka said suddenly, her voice barely above a whisper. "More children, more chaos and laughter and love. I want to fill this house with family, Ethan. I want Eric to have siblings who will love and protect him. I want to build something so strong, so full of love that no amount of prejudice or hatred can tear it down." "Then that is what we will do," Ethan promised. "We will keep building, keep fighting, keep loving, and we will teach our children to do the same. We will raise them to be strong and kind and proud of who they are. And maybe, just maybe, by the time they are grown, the world will have changed enough that they will not have to fight as hard as we did." "Maybe," Grishka agreed. "But even if it is not, they will be ready. Because they will have us to show them how it is done." Ethan wrapped his arm around his wife and child, holding them close, and felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He had everything he had ever wanted: love, family, a home, a purpose. The road had been hard, and he knew there would be more challenges ahead. But they would face them together, as they always had, and that was enough. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Ethan thought back to that night in the tavern, when a drunk's insult had sparked a brawl that had changed his life forever. He had thrown the first punch in defense of the woman he loved, not knowing where that choice would lead. But he would do it again in a heartbeat, because that moment had set in motion everything that mattered: falling in love with Grishka, building a life together, bringing Eric into the world. Sometimes, Ethan reflected, the most important moments in life come when you decide to stand up for what is right, regardless of the consequences. That night in the tavern, he had made that choice. And every day since, he had chosen love over prejudice, courage over fear, hope over despair. "I love you," he murmured to Grishka, kissing the top of her head. "I love you too," she replied, her voice warm and content. Inside, Eric stirred in his sleep, making a small sound before settling again. Ethan looked down at his son's peaceful face and felt his heart swell with love and determination. He would spend the rest of his life making sure Eric knew he was loved, that he belonged, that his mixed heritage was something to be proud of rather than ashamed of. The future stretched out before them, full of possibility and promise. There would be more harvests to bring in, more prejudice to overcome, more challenges to face. But Ethan knew that as long as he had Grishka by his side and their children to fight for, he could handle anything the world threw at them. He had found his home, not in a place, but in the people he loved. And that was worth more than all the acceptance and approval in the world. As the night deepened and the stars wheeled overhead, Ethan Dalmore sat with his family on the porch of his farmhouse and felt complete. The journey had been hard, but the destination was everything he had ever dreamed of and more. He had thrown the first punch that night in the tavern, defending the woman he loved, and in doing so, he had set in motion a story of love, courage, and hope that would echo through generations to come, and he would not change a single moment of it.